Hello and welcome to InDesign's Super Design. I'm Alicia Callahan and I will be the moderator for this session this evening, Finding the Light, a live Q&A with Michael Anastassiades. Before we jump into today's session, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where part of this event is taking place, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to any elders past, present and emerging, and the Aboriginal elders of any other communities who may be here today. So this evening, we will be talking to Michael about his latest designs for floss, the coordinates and last order. We'll be hearing about the story behind them, as well as his approach and process to lighting design in general. So thank you to Euroluce for supporting this session of Super Design. You can also see coordinates on display in Euroluce's Sydney showroom, and it's soon to be on display in the Melbourne showroom. And also just to let you know that this session, and in fact all of the sessions from Super Design, will be available on demand via the Super Design website. So although he may need no introduction, it would be remiss to not highlight some of Michael's outstanding achievements. So you'll just have to bear with me while I introduce you, Michael. Michael Anastassiades founded his studio in London in 1994, followed by his eponymous brand in 2007. In 2013, he started collaborating with Floss. His work looks to explore contemporary notions of culture and aesthetics through lighting, furniture, objects, and spatial design. Michael trained as a civil engineer at London's Imperial College of Science, Technology and Medicine before undertaking a master's in industrial design at the Royal College of Art. So his work has been featured in permanent collections at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the MAC in Vienna, the Crafts Council in London, and the Frac Centre in France. And he's also had countless solo exhibitions at some of the most respected institutions around the world, including his first survey exhibition, Things That Go Together, which was presented at the Nicosia Municipal Arts Centre in Cyprus, your hometown, I believe, in 2019. He's also designed lighting and products for some of the biggest manufacturers, including Floss, B&B Italia, Herman Miller, Cassina, Bang & Olufsen, and the list goes on and on. So before we jump into our Q&A tonight, I just wanted to give a rundown of the format. So in just a minute, Michael will be sharing some imagery of the new pieces that he's designed for Floss, just so that we all have a visual reference and some context. We'll then be going into our discussion about Michael's work and process, and then we will be opening it up to audience questions. So it's not every day that we have the opportunity to speak to such a well-respected designer. So if there is anything you would like to ask Michael, just pop it into the chat at the bottom of your screen and there will be time for me to relay it at the end. So now let's have a look at coordinates, and Michael will be talking us through this latest collection for Floss.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm really flattered.
There's a lot to get through.
It's a real pleasure to be with you today. I wanted to show you a small presentation of the latest collection for Floss Coordinates. These are some images that are from the Four Seasons restaurant in New York. For which it was a commission originally for developing this this range, and it was the idea of achieving quite an impressive illumination for the general dining room. So you can see some of the images here. And this is from our latest photo shoot that we have done in Milan in an abandoned glass factory. And some of the single elements that you're able to use in the home. So you can use these fixtures above a dining table or in stairwells, or we have some floor lamps, as you can see here, in the different configurations. And this is from the Milan flagship showroom of Floss, showcasing coordinates, the modular system, as well as the last order table lamp that you see on the plinth on the left-hand side of the picture. And this is from the B&B showroom in London. And lastly, in the Copenhagen showroom that we launched coordinates back in September. So, and this is last order as a close-up. I've got the lamps also at the back. Here we'll be able to show you in more detail later on. And this is from the photo shoot that we developed with Laila Gohar, a food artist in New York. She did the styling for this whole shoot. And as you can see, this is very beautiful pictures we did in New York back in August, that are also featured in Floss's latest issue of the magazine.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. There's actually so much I want to ask you about. And I guess to start off with, you know, you mentioned that the Four Seasons hotel. So Coordinates was actually designed for a specific site and a specific project. I would love to know, like, how did you translate something for a more agnostic or a more versatile purpose?
Well, it's interesting because Coordinates started as an exercise of illumination, of a uniform or spread out illumination within the space. It's a system that actually allows you to develop, grow, and spread across an environment. And also it can travel from one space to another by simply having a system of vertical and horizontal lighting strips that interconnect to create this quite kind of complex grid. That also gives you the freedom to introduce more illumination in certain areas and then, you know, spread it thinner as you wish. And this was the main exercise for the dining area of the Four Seasons. The Four Seasons, I wanted to mention that it was a design by Brazilian architect, Issei Wainfield, who took on the task to relocate the historical Four Seasons restaurant in New York that everybody knows about, the Philip Johnson, amazing space, but this was in a different place, so it had to be different. But we wanted to find something quite iconic, quite strong, that resonated, that impressive sculpture that was also in the main dining space. So hence the grid, the illuminated grid that we did. Once we saw the result, it was pretty obvious that it was a very strong concept. And as Floss were also the partners for making and realizing this commission in New York, I thought it would only make sense that we produce this widely and make it available also for other projects as well as for individual consumers. So apart from the complex, let's say, bespoke structures that you can actually order, we decided to produce a series of easier, like, modules or different configurations that individuals were able also to use.
Wonderful. And I think, you know, that linearity really does, it's very striking in Coordinates. What was your inspiration or sort of conceptual jumping off point?
The inspiration for Coordinates?
Yes.
Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier, was a simple exercise to allow light to travel within the space. So somehow it's almost like you have a plan of an interior, and you start sketching the areas or hatching the areas that you would like to illuminate. So it was simply an exercise of illumination. And so this hatch somehow got translated in 3 dimensions into this Cartesian grid that, you know, suddenly was growing inside this volume and could form interesting an interesting, let's say, structure that becomes very sculptural, but it also resolves the problem of spreading lighting within a space in a uniform way.
And you also showed us some images of Last Order, which is a table lamp, a portable table lamp. Can you share some background on this new product as well?
Yes, absolutely. I have it actually here, and I think it could be quite a nice thing to show. What is interesting about it is that you have this cast glass column together with the light source on the top, and it basically projects the light as a downlighter, indirect lighting onto the table. These were the lamps that we originally designed for the dining tables of the Four Seasons restaurant. We decided to make this into a portable, rechargeable wireless lamp that people could use. And we have it in 2 versions. We have the clear kind of glass column that you see here. And there's also another one over here, which is really very beautiful, is this fluted column. So it's almost like a classical, ancient Greek column.
I think something that really stands out when you're talking about both of these products, but it's really, lighting in general. Lighting can be such a powerful way to influence mood and atmosphere in a space. I would love to know, does this factor into your design process?
I think it's a key of my design process. I think that the actual illumination, the actual glow is the most important part of any fixture. And this is always my starting point. The source of light, the quality of that light, the temperature of that light, the intensity of that light, because that's what the eye reads. And this is what affects you psychologically when you look at a source of illumination. I think from then on is the sculptural qualities of the fixture itself. Light is a very unique object. It's very different than any other form of design object, and very, very different than furniture in the fact that it actually has 2 lights. I mean, 70 or 80% of the time, a light fixture is off. So you have to enjoy its sculptural qualities while it's off. But when you suddenly turn it on, something magic really happens, because then the illumination factor comes in. And the way that it interacts with the physicality of the objects around, the shadows that it casts, the space that it's placed in. So you have to design for both these lives. And this is always the challenging thing that you have to kind of face when designing lighting. But it always starts from the source, and with all the fixtures that I have designed, this is my starting point.
I think there would be a lot of considerations to take on board when designing lighting, and one thing that stands out to me with Last Order is that it's so elegant and small and compact, but yet would need to be quite technical. Can you sort of talk to some of those technical considerations that go into designing a light?
Well, for every lamp, there is always a technical challenge, and you need partners to deliver those challenges. In the case of Floss, they have an incredible R&D department. The guys in there, they're absolutely fantastic. They really know their technical side, every technical side that relates to lighting. And so those challenges are shared with an incredible team, and then the dialogue begins. So, you know, the conversation. So they make some proposals, then I respond to those proposals, and we both build on the design. And this is pretty much the design process that we're looking at when developing all these fixtures. And every fixture is a challenge, is a very different challenge than the previous one. I mean, of course, after all these years of working in lighting, I have developed quite a good, let's say, background, technical background, to also know what is possible. But it's very refreshing to come from a place where you have no limits. And what's great about Floss is that they acknowledge that freshness in the approach, and they're able to help you realize these dreams somehow. You have this idea that is totally hypothetical at the beginning, and somehow comes to life at the end.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just on your collaboration with Floss over the years, you have designed some like truly iconic pieces like the string lights, Captain Flint, the Icy Lights collection. And when I look at all of these ranges, they all have such a beautiful, elegant simplicity that I think is actually a lot harder to achieve than what it might seem. I would love to know if you could just talk to like how these ranges came about, or sort of what motivated you when working on some of these collections.
The first collection I designed for Floss was actually the string light collection, and it was presented of a string or wire that was super thin, and hence I called it string, because it was as thin as a string, that would enable you to attach it at different parts of the room, whether this was on the wall, up on the ceiling, and then somehow start drawing in 3 dimensions. It was a very unique concept. It was offering creativity back to the user. So rather than the designer being the creative and taking full responsibility over delivering a design in the way that it needs to be seen, it was somehow handing that creativity to the person that would buy this lamp. So it was their job from then on to start drawing in their own space. So by simply choosing the points to attach, but at the same time, what was interesting as an exercise from my side was the fact that people felt very intimidated when they were given that freedom. It's almost like somebody gives you a blank sheet of paper and a pen, and they tell you draw something, and you never know how you're going to make the first mark. And some people somehow felt blocked by this act, and it was interesting because for me, I was studying this reaction. It took a while before people embraced that kind of concept, and it was more appealing. It was very appealing also to architects and interior designers that had the confidence to use that fixture. But for the everyday individual, it was very difficult concept to kind of somehow grasp. If you look at what happened later in arrangements, which was another family that was developed on a similar principle of the idea of creativity and who is the creative person, was providing this geometric, illuminated elements that people were able to combine in different, in putting them together in different configurations. So you choose the geometric form or the selection of forms, and by simply linking them like a chain, you create this kind of vertical illuminations that simply kind of hang in a very beautiful and poetic way. But in that case, let's say it was easier to deal with because there were certain parameters under which you had to work. It wasn't that uncontrolled freedom that you had with string lights. And I see coordinates now as an evolution also of the arrangement series. The idea that you multiply these volumes and you position them in the space in such a way that you build on this complexity, or simply you can use them as individual elements, and they're also very, very beautiful on their own. So if you identify this, I think three very key families, which I would say as a modular systems, as I call them, then the rest of the families that I developed for Floss, like the super successful IC lamps that everybody knows, they were built on different concepts, on somehow celebrating the sphere, the illuminated sphere, and on the concept of balance, allowing that sphere to balance on all these individual sticks, stick configurations that we had.
And did you have any challenges along the way with any of these ranges in terms of resolving the design?
It's a challenge right from day one, Alicia. I mean, it's for as simple as these fixtures look, they're really highly complex to resolve, and this is the beauty of them. You know, when you see them, they look so effortless, but the reality is that there's so much work to achieve that effortlessness. I mean, it's really a constant reminder that you have to constantly remind yourself right from the beginning, what is your starting point, what are you trying to achieve? And to achieve this level of simplicity, it requires quite a lot of technological knowledge, and you're constantly trying to push the boundaries. You know, how do you achieve such a thin section of string, of wire in the string lights, for example? It's magic that it looks like a thread almost in the space.
Are there any ideas or concepts that you've got bubbling away that you can talk to us about? I'm throwing you a rogue question here.
We certainly, showcased a very beautiful collection, very interesting kind of concept, I would say, in Euroluce, in the main lighting fair a year and a half ago in Milan, and that's my circuit, and that's still under development to be launched at a later date. But you know, as a lighting designer, ideas are always in my head, and they're always cooking, and we always have conversations also with Floss about what's next. But I think it's too early to define at the moment, but there's lots of new exciting things coming up.
So I would love to know, actually, you know, we're talking about lighting, and I think the topic of the discussion tonight is lighting, but as a designer who also designs spaces and furniture, how, like, is your approach any different depending on what you're designing?
As I mentioned before, Alicia, was that lighting is quite unique in the fact that it has this kind of double existence, you know, off and on. I think with the rest of the designs, I mean, of course, there's different challenges there. In the case of furniture, is the idea that you can actually occupy the piece and physically engage with the piece, which is very different rather than experiencing the piece and moving around the piece as it is in the lighting case. I have worked in multiple fields. I mean, from audio equipment, designed a speaker for Bank & Olufsen. That was a very, very different, obviously, approach because you're dealing with sound. And like light, it has some similarities in the way that sound occupies the space. So every project is a new challenge, and you have to really understand where they're placed in that bigger spectrum of design, and really understand those challenges before you start the design process.
Amazing. So we can open it up to audience questions. We haven't had any come through yet, but I just want to put it out there to everyone who's tuning in that if you've got a question for Michael, now is the time to send it through. But I would like to delve into some of your sort of like your earlier introduction to design. What actually drew you to design and lighting in particular?
As I was growing up, Alicia, I always wanted to do something creative. I was always making things with my hands. I cannot define it so much as design, and especially back then. I grew up in a very small place in an island in Cyprus. Obviously, being an island and being small in the middle of the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, it was quite kind of isolated in terms of how much influence do you get from the West and what's happening around the world. I mean, of course, have to imagine a time when the internet was not around. So, we had to rely on books and reading and getting inspired by this thing. And also growing up in a place where design actually didn't exist in terms of modern design, didn't exist. I mean, there was, of course, the ancient findings and examples of design in the ancient world, and archaeological findings also in the world of folk and everyday folk art and everyday objects. So my design education came quite late on. I really found out about design probably in my late teens and early 20s. By that time, I had decided I wanted to study civil engineering because my parents didn't want me to become an artist. For some reason, their idea of becoming an artist is always a failed one. You're never a successful artist, or the chances that you will be a successful artist are very faint. So they said, if you need a job, you need to study something that is going to give you a job. And that was the civil engineering part. So I went to Imperial College for 3 years and finished a degree there. But during the time I was at the Royal College, at the Imperial College, I discovered the Royal College, which was around the corner, and visited that school. And of course, a whole new world opened up. And I said, this is where I want to be. This is where I see myself. So I tried to see how could I get in and what I could do. And it was a design course that I could actually apply to. And that's what changed everything. But the engineer side of myself is still in me. And I think that's what really allows me to have a knowledge on how to implement all those ideas.
Yeah, I think particularly, when you look at, as we've discussed about the kind of the technical thought that really goes into a lot of your designs, I think that 100% is impacted and influenced from your engineering experience. So we have a question here from Louise. How do you hope or aim for your designs to impact the people who find themselves in your lit spaces?
Sorry, the last bit I didn't catch.
How do you hope or aim for your designs to impact the people who find themselves in the spaces with your lighting?
Well, it's interesting because I think the role of the designer is quite amazing. I mean, you creating something that has to start having a life on its own. Once you do it, you can only predict certain things, but you cannot predict absolutely everything in the life of an object. So it's almost like releasing something into the wild. And then from then on, it's open to interpretation. Of course, it has a function. Of course, is suggesting a certain way of using, but the unpredictability of what the real use of the object is going to be remains a surprise. And this is what is beautiful about it. And also, what is interesting for me to observe once I launch a product is to see the different ways that people use it and how it actually affects their life. And that psychological somehow dependency that develops between the user and the object is what is magic for me to see. But you can have control as a designer, but you can definitely not control everything.
And how do you think experience comes into it? I think, the idea of the experience of a space is a really, it's something that obviously designers do aim to have impact in. How do you see experience playing into the things that you design?
I think proportion is everything in design. At least proportion is the most important element that I design or principle that I design under. And when I talk about proportion, it's about how intimidating does an object feel with relation to the human scale. How do you actually respond? And that first meeting of yourself with the object is when you encounter that object, when you see it right in front of you. How does it feel? Does it feel threatening? Does it feel welcoming? So scale is really important, and within that specific scale, proportions. How is it long? Is it short? Is it big? Is it small? And how welcoming is that encounter is the key factor for me of making a successful product, because you need to feel familiar with an object. There needs to be a sense of familiarity, because if you simply rely on shocking people, and there are cases where designs are quite shocking, they're there to provoke you. I think once the novelty of the first reaction dies, then the object stops having a life. So what's important is to start with introducing something that feels comfortable, something that feels familiar. In that way, you have more chances that the object will remain with you for a long period of time, and hopefully forever, because you feel comfortable with it and you keep on discovering things about it, rather than just simply shocking somebody with it, and then eventually once the shock dies, then there's nothing left about the object.
I think that really speaks to like longevity and timelessness as well. And we actually have quite a few questions coming in. So the next one from the audience is, what is the most important aspect of lighting design in your estimation? Is it bringing emotion to a project or attending to the design itself?
Well, I think it's both of this in a way. I mean, emotion is a big part of it. I talked about, you know, the light source, the temperature, the intensity, the warmth, everything about all these different things that define your response to light. I think as humans, we are attracted to light, and we always worshipped sources of light, whether this is the sun or the moon. You know, we find light in nature, and actually the beauty, or the real beauty of light, actually exists in nature. You know, with artificial light, you can never really replace natural source, because also the unpredictability in the way that light exists in nature cannot be replaced. So that sense of poetry is really strong. So what we are aiming as designers, and as lighting designers in specific, is to capture, let's say, at least one element of that beauty of light in the way that it exists naturally.
That actually segues perfectly to another question here from Kim, and they say, do you have a comment on the color rendering of different lamp types, LED lamps versus incandescent? And I think, you know, that's that idea of artificial versus natural, and yeah, what's your opinion on that?
Well, the great thing about LED technology is that you're able to control the temperature or define the temperature of the light source that you're working with. And especially when you can actually, you know, are lucky not to just work with what's on the market, but to actually develop your own LED illumination. And the blessing with working with companies like Floss is the fact that, you know, the numbers are so big, so you're able to really define what that source is. So controlling the temperature is the key. And with Floss, we work on a color temperature of 2,700, which is a really beautiful warmth that you still manage to maintain, and a good source of illumination. So it's always a negotiation between how bright the light needs to be, how warm the light needs to be. Obviously, if you work with standard bulbs, unfortunately, each and every one of them has a different color temperature, and this is when kind of chaos happens. So I think trying to achieve uniformity in the source of illumination is the key element for every interior. Some people feel more comfortable with colder lighting, with brighter lighting, but you know, this is a personal choice at the end of the day. I feel that lighting is not there to blind you, you know, it's not there to really turn the night into the day, because there is no point. I mean, this is the reason why we have the daytime and we have the nighttime, and one shouldn't try to replace the other.
No. Right, we have another question from Mustafa, and he says, do you do anything to take your mind off designing? Do you get inspired for an idea when you don't think about it?
I always daydream wherever I am, even sometimes when I'm in the studio. I always kind of think, or my mind sort of drifts to another place, sometimes even if I'm in a meeting. So my concentration span is quite, you know, I would say relatively short in that way. So I can't stop drifting off to something else when I see something, when something catches my eye. then I start imagining things. And this is what keeps me engaged creatively. Sometimes it sparks of some ideas, and then I always carry my sketchbook with me, and I start kind of sketching or putting an idea down, and then I let this sink in, and then hopefully eventually that I might be lucky to have planted a seed that will germinate one day and become something like an object, a product, or a light fixture. So
I was going to ask you, do you sketch or take notes, or do you have a combination of digital and sort of hand?
I always sketch, Alicia. Sorry to interrupt you, but I always sketch. For me, the purity and the spontaneity of a sketch is irreplaceable. You cannot actually replicate that with, let's say, computer-generated drawing or anything like that. And when I look at the sketch, I can see a glimpse of hope that, something good is going to come out of it, even if it's just a line sometimes. But and I try to communicate this with my team in the studio. And then from what we try to do is to try to translate the sketch into a three-dimensional object by physically making a three-dimensional sketch with different materials, sometimes not even the real materials that we're planning to use for the piece, but pieces of card or whatever we can actually find. And we try to make things in the real scale of the object, and then this is when we start exploring proportion, scale, all these factors that I explained before. And it's only at the last stage of design, when we physically have an object, that we go onto the computer and we try to technically communicate the making, or what this object actually will look like in its finished form. And then, but by that time, it's pretty much defined. I'm not saying that but it's really rare that, let's say, the computer, process or part influences the design. So it's really at the last stages, and that's really small percentage of that contribution.
So we have 5 minutes left. So if anyone did have another question, now is your time to get it in. But we have another one here that asks, what would you like to design that you haven't already in lighting?
I came into design quite late in my career, Alicia. So, I in a sense that I started working with floss in 2011. My first collection was in 2013. Already by that time, a lot of designers that I knew, that were friends of mine, that I studied with, already had quite a developed career in design. And I felt that there was a lot for me to learn. And it was that I had somehow taken a slow path to arrive to that place. I'm saying this because I never really felt anxious or thirsty to do everything, And I said at that point that I'd rather produce a few things, but they really need to be meaningful, and they need to make a difference. And so I feel lucky with every challenge that is put on my desk. I have no ambition to design every single product on this planet. I have no ambition to design a spacecraft to take me to outer space. I'm really challenged by the simplest object, the smallest object that is there. And there is a beauty, I think, in embracing that and being able to find excitement in simple objects.
And I think that goes back to what you were saying just before about, you know, timelessness and designing for a long life. All right, well, I have one more question, but we have 2 minutes, so you'll have to say it very quickly, and then we'll need to sign off and say all our thank yous. But the question is lighting more about an installation these days to impress rather than lighting as a background to assist?
I think definitely not the first one. At least my approach is not to impress. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in something that is more meaningful, because the first impression, of course, is important, but the first impression usually dies out quite quickly. So what's important is to really focus on the things that will remain or will linger with you emotionally. You know, how you know, what are the after effects of encountering a light, and then discovering things. I always loved light fixtures that you don't notice at first when you enter a space, because they blend in with your interior. And the biggest compliments usually is when I try to describe a light that I might have in an interior space that I designed, and most of the times in my home. A lot of people say, oh, that had been to my house many times. They say, oh, I don't remember it. And this for me is the biggest compliment. So on a second visit, you're hoping that this is going to change. And this is really important, because when you start noticing things the second time around, and then maybe the third time around, you turn around and say, actually, this is very beautiful. And this slow growth, you know, of excitement of what actually, or this value that you give to a product, and how it grows over time, I think is the key element in defining a successful product for me.
Michael, amazing. Thank you so much for your time. It has been a fabulous talk, and thank you for getting up so early in London to have this talk halfway around the world with us today. Thank you to Euroluce for making this session possible. And as I mentioned, coordinates is currently on display at Euroluce in Sydney. Michael, thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to everybody who has made this conversation possible, and to you, Alicia, for the exciting conversation.
Amazing. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.